Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comment section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Leonarda Cianciulli was born on April 14, 1894, in a small town called Montella, which is in the Avellino province of Italy. Her family was part of the local community, but from a very young age, Leonarda's life was filled with personal struggles that shaped who she would become. As a young woman, she was not happy. She felt deep sadness and despair, and this led her to try to end her own life not just once, but 2 separate times. These attempts showed that she had serious emotional problems, though at the time, people may have simply thought she was troubled or overly dramatic. This was the first sign that her mind worked differently from other people's. When Leonarda was 23 years old, in 1917, she decided to get married. The man she chose was Raphael Pansardi, a clerk who worked in a registry office. This decision created a huge conflict in her family. Leonarda's mother had already planned for her daughter to marry a different man, someone she approved of. When Leonarda went against her mother's wishes, her mother became very angry. Leonarda later claimed that on the day of her wedding, her mother did not just get angry, she placed a curse on her and her new husband. Whether Leonarda truly believed this, or used it later to explain her bad luck, this idea of a curse stayed in her mind. It made her feel that her life was doomed from that moment forward. After the wedding, Leonarda and Raphael moved to Raphael's hometown, a place called Loria in the Potenza region. Life there was normal for a while, but Leonarda's troubled nature soon got her into serious trouble. In 1927, she was convicted of fraud. This means she tricked people or lied to get money or goods. The court sentenced her to prison. This was a major event in her life. It showed that she was willing to break the law and deceive others to get what she wanted. After serving her time in prison, she was released, but the couple could not stay in Loria. The shame of the crime and the prison sentence likely made it hard for them to live there, so they decided to move again. They moved to another town called Lacedonia in the Avellino region. They tried to build a new life there, but in 1930, a terrible natural disaster struck. A large earthquake hit the area, and their home was completely destroyed. This was a huge setback. They lost everything they owned and were forced to leave. They moved once more, this time to the town of Correggio, in the province of Reggio Emilia. It was here, in this new town, that Leonarda finally found some stability. She opened a small shop. In this shop, she sold everyday items to the local people. Leonarda was very friendly and helpful to her customers. She became a popular and well-respected woman in her neighborhood. People trusted her. They saw her as a kind, hard-working woman and a devoted mother. No one in Correggio knew about her past suicide attempts or her prison sentence for fraud. Her role as a mother was the most important thing in her life. Leonarda had been pregnant 17 times during her marriage. This is an extremely high number. However, her body and fate were not kind to her. 3 of her pregnancies ended in miscarriage. Even more tragically, 10 of her children died when they were young. This means that out of 17 pregnancies, only 4 children survived to become adults. This constant loss of a child, over and over again, deeply affected Leonarda. It filled her with a powerful, overwhelming fear. She became fiercely protective of the 4 children she had left, especially her eldest son, whose name was Giuseppe. He was her favorite, and she worried about him constantly. This fear was made worse by things that fortune tellers had told her. Sometime earlier, she had visited a fortune teller who predicted that she would get married and have children, but that every single one of those children would die young. This prediction haunted her, and the deaths of her many children seemed to prove it was true. She also went to see a Roma woman who read palms. This woman looked at Leonarda's hands and gave her a chilling warning. She said, "In your right hand I see prison. In your left hand I see a criminal asylum." This meant that the fortune teller saw a future for Leonarda that would end either in jail or in a mental hospital. Leonarda carried these dark predictions with her as she lived her life in Correggio, running her shop and caring for her beloved son, Giuseppe. The year 1939 brought a new and terrifying worry into Leonarda Cianciulli's life. Her eldest and most beloved son, Giuseppe, was called to join the Royal Italian Army. The world was on the brink of the Second World War, and Leonarda was absolutely terrified that he would be sent to fight and be killed. She could not bear the thought of losing another child, especially him. The old fortune teller's words that all her children would die young echoed in her mind constantly. Leonarda became desperate. She believed she had to do something extreme, something powerful, to protect him. In her mind, she arrived at a dark and twisted conclusion. She believed that to save her son, she needed to make human sacrifices. She thought that by offering the lives of others, some higher power would spare Giuseppe. Leonarda did not look for victims in faraway places. She found them among the women who lived near her, women who knew her as a friendly and helpful neighbor. These women trusted her completely. They came to her with their problems, and Leonarda used their trust against them in a cold and calculated way. The first woman was Faustina Setti. Faustina was a woman who had never married. She was lonely and wished to find a husband. She shared this secret desire with Leonarda, her trusted neighbor. Leonarda saw her chance. She told Faustina that she knew of a perfect man for her. This man, she said, lived in a town called Pola, which was far away. Leonarda explained that she could arrange everything, but Faustina had to be very secretive. She must not tell any of her relatives or friends where she was really going. It was to be a wonderful surprise. Leonarda also came up with a clever trick to make sure no one would report Faustina missing right away. She told Faustina to write several letters and postcards to her family and friends before she left. In these letters, Faustina was to write that she was happy and doing well in Pola. Leonarda promised to mail them from Pola after Faustina had arrived. This way, everyone would think she was alive and well in a different city. Faustina, excited about her new future, did exactly as she was told. On the day she was supposed to leave for her new life, Faustina went to Leonarda's house for a final visit. This was the moment Leonarda had planned for. She had an axe ready. When Faustina was not looking, Leonarda struck her with the axe, killing her instantly. She then dragged the body into a closet where no one could see. In that small space, she used a knife to cut the body into 9 separate pieces. She was very careful to collect all the blood in a large basin. Leonarda later explained exactly what she did next in a statement to the police. She took a large pot and put all the pieces of flesh into it. She then added 7 kilograms of a strong chemical called caustic soda. She had bought this chemical earlier to make soap, but now she used it for a different purpose. She stirred the mixture over heat for a very long time until the flesh completely dissolved. It turned into a thick, dark, liquid mush. She poured this liquid into several buckets and then emptied the buckets into a septic tank that was near her house. But Leonarda did not stop there. She also had the basin full of Faustina's blood. She waited for the blood to become solid, like jelly. Then, she put it in her oven to dry it out completely. Once it was dry and hard, she ground it into a fine powder. She mixed this powder with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, eggs, and a little bit of margarine. She kneaded all of this together to make a dough. From this dough, she baked many small, crunchy tea cakes. She then served these cakes to the other ladies who came to visit her. She even ate some herself and gave them to her son Giuseppe. Faustina Setti had also given Leonarda her life savings, which was 30,000 lire, as payment for helping her find a husband. Leonarda kept all the money. No one questioned where Faustina had gone, because her family had received the letters and thought she was happy in Pola. The second murder happened about a year later. The victim was another woman from the neighborhood named Francesca Soavi. Leonarda used a similar trick, but this time she changed the story. She told Francesca that she had found her a good job at a school for girls in a city called Piacenza. Just like with Faustina, Leonarda made Francesca write postcards to her friends. In these cards, Francesca was to say she was leaving for this new job. This time, Leonarda told her to mail the cards from Correggio herself, before she supposedly left. This made it seem like she had gone away willingly. On the evening of September 5, 1940, Francesca came to Leonarda's house to say goodbye before her journey. Leonarda offered her some wine. Unknown to Francesca, the wine was drugged. When Francesca was sleepy and confused, Leonarda picked up her axe and killed her. She then disposed of the body in exactly the same way as the first one. She cut it up, boiled it with caustic soda, and poured the remains into the septic tank. The blood was again turned into powder for her tea cakes. From Francesca Soavi, Leonarda obtained about 3,000 lire. Again, no one suspected the friendly shopkeeper. The third and final victim was a woman named Virginia Cassioppo. Virginia was a widow who had once been a famous singer, performing on big stages like La Scala Opera House in Milan. She was not poor like the others. She had money, jewels, and valuable papers. Leonarda saw an opportunity for a much larger reward. She told Virginia that she had found her a wonderful new job. She said a mysterious and important theater manager in Florence needed a secretary. Virginia was interested. Leonarda gave her the same instructions. Tell no one where you are going. On September 30th, 1940, Virginia Cassioppo came to Leonarda's house for her last visit. The murder followed the same pattern. Leonarda likely used drugged wine and her axe. But the way she disposed of the body was slightly different this time, and Leonarda seemed proud of it. Because Virginia's body had more fat, Leonarda decided to use it to make a special product, soap. She boiled the pieces of flesh in the pot. As she boiled them, she skimmed the fat that rose to the top. According to her own words, she was pleased because Virginia's flesh was fat and white. After it had melted down, she added a bottle of cologne to the mixture to make it smell nice. She boiled it for a long time until she had made a large amount of creamy soap. She cut this soap into bars and gave them as gifts to her neighbors and acquaintances. They had no idea what the soap was really made from. She also made her usual tea cakes from Virginia's blood, and she said these cakes tasted even better than the others. From Virginia Cassioppo, Leonarda got a much larger sum, 50,000 lire, plus valuable jewelry and government bonds. She also sold all of Virginia's clothes and shoes to make more money. After this third murder, Leonarda felt a sense of pride in her work. She was not afraid. She continued to live her life, run her shop, and serve her homemade cakes to visitors. Her son Giuseppe was still safe, and in her mind, her terrible plan was working. No one in the neighborhood connected her to the women who had disappeared. To them, she was still the kind woman who ran the little shop. But one person was beginning to have doubts. Virginia Cassioppo's sister-in-law, a woman named Albertina Fanny, noticed that Virginia had vanished very suddenly. She remembered that the last time anyone had seen Virginia, she was walking towards Leonarda Cianciulli's house. This small observation was the first crack in Leonarda's perfect plan. It was the detail that would soon lead to everything being discovered. Albertina Fanny, the sister-in-law of Virginia Cassioppo, could not stop thinking about Virginia's sudden disappearance. Days passed, and there was no word from Virginia at all. This was very strange. Albertina knew that Virginia had been excited about a new job, but it did not make sense that she would leave without saying a proper goodbye to her family. Albertina thought hard about the last time she had seen Virginia. She clearly remembered seeing her walk towards the house of Leonarda Cianciulli, the friendly woman who ran the local shop. Virginia had mentioned she needed to see Leonarda about something important before she left. After that, Virginia was never seen again. Albertina's worry turned into deep suspicion. She felt she had to do something, so she went to the police. Albertina went to the office of the superintendent of police in the nearby city of Reggio Emilia. She told them her story. She explained that her sister-in-law, Virginia Cacioppo, had disappeared. She gave the police Leonarda Cianciulli's name and address. She told them that Virginia was last seen entering that house. The police listened to Albertina. They decided that her story was serious enough to investigate. They opened an official case and began to look into the disappearance of Virginia Cacioppo. Their first step was to go to Correggio and talk to this woman, Leonarda Cianciulli. When the police first questioned Leonarda, she was very calm and cooperative. She acted like a normal, helpful woman. She told them that yes, Virginia had come to see her. She explained that Virginia had told her she was leaving to take a wonderful new job in Florence. Leonarda said Virginia had been very happy and had simply gone off to start her new life. The police were not completely satisfied with this answer. Something felt wrong. They started asking other people in the neighborhood questions. They learned that two other women from the area, Faustina Setti and Francesca Soavi, had also disappeared in the past year or so. Both had supposedly moved away for new opportunities. This was too much of a coincidence. The police began to focus their attention entirely on Leonarda. As the police dug deeper, they found the letters and postcards that Faustina and Francesca had written. The letters said they were fine and living in other cities. But the police noticed something important. The letters had been mailed from Correggio, not from Pola or Piacenza, where the women were supposed to be. This was a clear sign that something was wrong. The women could not have mailed them from Correggio if they had already left. The police realized that Leonarda had tricked them into writing those letters to cover up their murders. Their suspicion grew stronger and stronger. They decided that Leonarda must be arrested and questioned more forcefully. Leonarda was taken to the police station and arrested. At first, she continued to deny everything. She stuck to her story that the women had simply moved away. But then, the police told her something that changed everything. They told her that they were beginning to suspect her son, Giuseppe, might be involved in the disappearances. This was the one thing Leonarda could not bear. Her entire purpose, her reason for killing those women, was to protect Giuseppe. She would not let him be blamed for what she had done. To save her son from any suspicion or punishment, she decided to confess. She told the police everything. She gave them a complete and detailed account of all three murders. She explained how she had killed them with an axe, how she had cut up their bodies, how she had boiled them with caustic soda, and how she had made soap and tea cakes from their remains. The police were horrified by her confession. They immediately went to her house and the areas around it to search for evidence. They opened the septic tank that Leonarda had mentioned. Inside, they found human remains and pieces of bone that had not completely dissolved. This was the physical proof they needed to confirm her story. They also searched her home and found the large pot she had used to boil the victims. They found the axe. They even found the bars of soap she had made from Virginia Cacioppo's body, and perhaps some of the tea cakes, though it is likely those had been eaten or given away long ago. All of these items were collected as evidence. The quiet shop in Correggio was now known as the scene of horrific crimes. Leonarda was put in prison to wait for her trial. However, the trial did not happen right away. The world was in the middle of the Second World War, and Italy was heavily involved. The justice system was slow and chaotic because of the war. Leonarda sat in prison for several years before her case was finally brought to court. It was not until 1946, 6 years after the last murder, that she stood trial in the city of Reggio Emilia. The courtroom was full of people who wanted to see the woman who had committed such terrible acts. During the trial, Leonarda showed no sadness or regret for what she had done. She was not sorry. She sat in the witness box and calmly told her story again. She even corrected the official reports if she thought a detail was wrong. She spoke with a strange pride in her work. At one point, she told the court that she had given the copper ladle she used to skim fat from the boiling pot to the Italian government during the war, because the country was in need of metal. She seemed to think this was a patriotic act. Her deep eyes gleamed as she spoke, and people in the court could see that she felt no guilt at all. The lawyers for the families of the victims spoke about the pain and loss they had suffered. The women had been murdered for their money and their lives, all because Leonarda wanted to protect her son. The jury listened to all the evidence and to Leonarda's own words. They found her guilty of all 3 murders. Because the crimes were so cruel and planned so carefully, the judge gave her a strong sentence. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. In addition, because it was clear she had serious mental problems, she was also sentenced to 3 years in a criminal asylum, which is a hospital for criminals who are mentally ill. Leonarda Cianciulli did not serve her full 30-year sentence in a regular prison. After her time in the asylum, she was moved to a women's prison. Later, she was transferred to a criminal asylum for women in a town called Pozzuoli, near Naples. She lived out the rest of her life there. On October 15, 1970, at the age of 76, she died suddenly from a cerebral apoplexy, which is a type of stroke that happens in the brain. Her life, which had begun with so much tragedy and had caused so much more, came to an end far from the small town of Correggio. After the case was closed, the victims' families were left to grieve, knowing the horrible truth of what had happened to their loved ones. The story of Leonarda Cianciulli became famous in Italy and around the world as one of the most bizarre and terrifying true crime stories ever told. Many of the items from the case, including the large pot she used to boil her victims and the axe she used to kill them, were not destroyed. They were put on display in the Criminological Museum in Rome, where they remain as a chilling reminder of her crimes. The woman known as the soap maker of Correggio had finally found her place in history, not as a kind shopkeeper, but as one of the most unusual serial killers of the 20th century. Story 2. Wolfgang Abel was born on March 25, 1959, in the city of Dusseldorf, which was in West Germany at that time. His family was very wealthy and held a high position in society. His father worked as a managing director for a large German insurance company. This job meant the family had a lot of money and lived in good neighborhoods. When Wolfgang was still young, his family decided to move from Germany to Italy. They settled in a town called Nigra di Valpolicella. This town is located in the hills near the city of Verona, in the northern part of Italy. It was a quiet and beautiful area, far from the busy city life of Dusseldorf. Marco Furlan was born on January 16, 1960, in Italy. Unlike Wolfgang, Marco grew up in the city of Verona itself. His family was also from the upper class, meaning they were wealthy and respected. Marco lived with his family in a part of Verona called Borgo Trento. This was a very nice and prestigious district where many doctors, lawyers, and other important people lived. Marco's father was a well-known doctor. He was the head of the burns unit at the Ospedale Civil Maggiore, which was the main hospital in Verona. This was a very serious and important job. He treated patients who had been badly burned in fires or accidents. Both boys received a good education because their families could afford it. They did not have to worry about money or basic needs. They grew up with everything they wanted. Wolfgang and Marco first met each other when they were teenagers. They both attended the same high school in Verona. Even though Wolfgang lived in Nigra and Marco lived in Verona, the school brought them together. They quickly became friends. They discovered that they shared many of the same thoughts and feelings about the world around them. As they spent more time together, their friendship grew stronger. They started to talk about what they saw in society. They looked at the people in their city and decided that many of them were bad or wrong. They developed very harsh opinions. They did not like people who used drugs. They did not like homeless people who lived on the streets. They did not like gay men or prostitutes. They also did not like priests who they believed were not following the rules of the church correctly. They disliked places like nightclubs and cinemas that showed adult movies. In their minds, all these people and places were dirty or wrong. They began to believe that the world needed to be cleaned up. They thought that these people should not exist. Their relationship was not just about being friends from school. They became part of a larger group of young people who used to meet in a public square in Verona. This square was called Piazza Vittorio Veneto, and it was located in the Borgo Trento district, very close to where Marco lived. The group would gather there to talk, spend time together, and socialize. Within this group, the bond between Wolfgang and Marco became the strongest. They trusted each other completely and shared their darkest thoughts, which they probably did not share with the others. After high school, both young men continued their studies at the university. They were both very intelligent and did well in their academic work. Marco Furlan decided to study physics at the University of Padua, which was a very respected university. He was close to finishing his degree and graduating when he was in his early 20s. Wolfgang Abel chose to study mathematics. He was also a very good student and graduated with honors, which was a sign of high achievement. After finishing his studies, Wolfgang started working for the same insurance company where his father was a director. He had a good job and a promising career ahead of him. By the time they were in their early 20s, both young men appeared to be successful and normal on the outside. They came from good families, had received excellent educations, and had promising futures. Marco was about to become a physicist. Wolfgang was a university graduate working in a good job. They lived in comfortable homes and wanted for nothing. But inside, their shared beliefs about the world had not gone away. Their friendship had only made these beliefs stronger and more fixed. They continued to think about the people they hated and the idea of cleaning up society. Their private conversations, away from their families and other friends, were filled with these thoughts. They were two intelligent young men from good families, but they shared a dark and growing hatred for many of the people around them. Wolfgang Abel and Marco Furlan were in their early 20s. They had finished their studies and started their careers. But their private conversations about cleaning up society did not stop. They moved from just talking to making plans. They decided to take action against the people they hated. They wanted to punish those they saw as deviant or wrong. Their first attack happened on August 25, 1977 in Verona. They chose a man named Guerino Spinelli as their first victim. He was a Roma man and also a drug addict. He was sitting in his small car, a Fiat 126. Wolfgang and Marco prepared for Molotov cocktails. These were simple bombs made from glass bottles filled with gasoline with a cloth wick. They threw these bottles at the car. The gasoline ignited and the car burst into flames. Guerino Spinelli was trapped inside and died from the fire. This was their first murder. It was a test to see if they could do it. They felt no regret and decided to continue. More than a year passed before their next attack. On December 17, 1978, they went to the city of Padua. They had found another victim, a man named Luciano Stefanato. He was a waiter and he was homosexual. Wolfgang and Marco approached him and attacked him with knives. They stabbed him many times, 30 times in total. The attack was very violent and personal. After he was dead, they took 2 of the blades and stuck them into his back. They left the knives there as a kind of signature. Then they left the scene. Almost another year went by. On December 12, 1979, they struck again. This time the city was Venice. The victim was a 22-year-old man named Claudio Costa. He was a drug addict. The method was the same as before. They used knives and stabbed him to death. The pattern was becoming clear. They were targeting people they considered to be on the margins of society: drug addicts, homosexuals, and later prostitutes. In 1980, they changed their weapons slightly. On December 20th, they went to Vicenza. Their victim was a 52-year-old prostitute named Alice Maria Beretta. For this murder, they did not use knives. They used an axe. They struck her with the axe and killed her. This showed they were willing to use different tools to achieve the same goal. They were learning and adapting. On November 25th, 1980, they did something new. They sent a letter to a newspaper. The newspaper was called Il Gazzettino, and its main office was in Mestre, a town near Venice. In the letter, they took responsibility for the murders. They signed the letter with a single name, Ludwig. This was the first time the public and the police heard that name. The killers were now communicating. Their next major attack happened on May 25th, 1981, in Verona. There was a small, abandoned stone building near the river. It was called La Torretta di Lungadage San Giorgio. It was old and had once been part of old Austrian fortifications. Now it was a place where homeless people and drug addicts would sleep at night because it was shelter. Wolfgang and Marco decided to burn it down. They set the building on fire. Inside were two young men sleeping. One was 17 years old, named Luca Martinati. The other was his friend. Luca Martinati died in the fire. His friend was badly injured but survived. After this fire, another letter was sent to a different newspaper, La Repubblica. The letter was signed Ludwig again. It said their faith was Nazism, their justice was death, and their democracy was extermination. They claimed responsibility for the fire. They also included a metal disc to prove it was really from them. They said it matched a disc on one of the torches they used. On July 20th, 1982, they targeted two Catholic priests. The priests were both 70 years old. Their names were Father Gabriele Pigato and Father Giuseppe Lovato. They were walking near their church at Monte Berico in Vicenza. Wolfgang and Marco approached them from behind. They were carrying hammers. They hit both priests on the head with the hammers. Father Gabriele died immediately at the scene. Father Giuseppe was rushed to the hospital, but died shortly after from his injuries. The killers had moved from targeting drug users to targeting religious figures they believed were sinful. On February 26, 1983, they killed another priest. His name was Don Armando Bison, and he was killed in Trento. The method was different this time. They did not use a hammer or a knife. They used an awl, which is a sharp, pointed tool for making holes in leather or wood. They drove the awl into the priest's skull. Attached to the awl was a small crucifix. They left it there, stuck in his head. Their attacks became larger and more deadly. On May 14, 1983, they went to Milan. They targeted a cinema called the Eros Cinema. This cinema showed adult films, which they hated. They planned to set it on fire. They brought gasoline and started a fire inside the building. The fire spread quickly. 6 people died in the fire. One of the dead was a 46-year-old doctor named Livio Ceresoli. He had not been watching a film. He was a doctor who lived nearby. When he saw the fire, he ran inside to try to help people and give medical aid. He died trying to save others. 32 other people were wounded or injured in the fire. They did not stop. On January 8, 1984, they traveled to Munich in West Germany. This was Wolfgang's home country. They attacked a disco called the Liverpool Disco. They started another fire. An Italian waitress who worked there, a woman named Corinne Tartarati, died in the flames. 7 other people were injured. After this attack, they sent another letter to newspapers. The letter mocked the dead waitress. It said, "At the Liverpool, they don't fuck anymore." They were now killing in other countries and mocking their victims in writing. Their last attack happened on the evening of March 4th, 1984. They chose a disco called the Melamara Disco. It was in a town called Castiglione del Stiviere, in the province of Mantua. That night, there was a carnival party at the disco. About 400 young people were inside. Many of them were wearing masks for the party. Wolfgang and Marco used this confusion to their advantage. One of them dressed as a Pierrot, a sad clown from French pantomime. He went inside. In a moment when no one was looking, he opened an emergency exit door. His partner was waiting outside. The partner was carrying 2 bags. The bags were filled with canisters of gasoline. They went to a dark corner of the disco. They started pouring the gasoline onto the carpet. They planned to light it and cause a huge fire, killing many people. But they made a mistake. They did not know about a new Italian law. Years before, in February 1983, there had been a terrible fire at a cinema called the Cinema Statuto in Turin. After that fire, the law changed. All public places in Italy had to use fire-resistant materials. The carpet at the Melamara Disco was fire-resistant. When they lit the gasoline, the carpet did not burn quickly. It slowed down the fire. A security guard working at the disco saw what was happening. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and put out the flames before they could spread. The 2 killers were now discovered. They tried to run. They attacked the bouncer at the door, trying to fight their way out. But they were surrounded by the crowd of young people leaving the disco. The crowd was angry. They held the 2 men and did not let them escape. Then the police arrived at the scene. The police took Wolfgang Abel and Marco Furlan into custody. The 2 men who had killed so many people over 7 years were finally caught because of a fireproof carpet. The arrest happened on the night of March 4th, 1984, right at the Melamara Disco. The police took Wolfgang Abel and Marco Furlan into custody. At first, the police did not fully understand who they had caught. They knew these 2 men had tried to burn down a disco, but they did not yet know they were the ones responsible for years of murders across Italy and Germany. The investigation began immediately. The police searched their homes. They looked through their personal belongings. They found items that connected them to the crimes. They found weapons. They found materials that could be used to make Molotov cocktails. They also found papers and notes. These notes matched the language used in the letters signed Ludwig that had been sent to newspapers over the years. The police compared handwriting. They found matches. The evidence was strong. Slowly, the police built a case. They connected Wolfgang and Marco to the fire at the Eros Cinema in Milan. They connected them to the murders of the priests. They connected them to the killings of drug addicts, homosexuals, and prostitutes. The full scope of their crimes became clear. Over a period of 7 years, from 1977 to 1984, they had committed many attacks. The final count was 27 people dead and 39 wounded. The 2 men were put on trial. The trial was held in a court in Italy. The prosecution presented all the evidence. They showed the weapons. They showed the letters signed Ludwig. They brought witnesses who had survived the attacks. They explained how Wolfgang and Marco had planned each crime, chosen their victims, and carried out the murders. The case against them was very strong. During the trial, Wolfgang Abel's lawyers asked for a psychiatric examination. They wanted to see if he was mentally fit and understood what he had done. Marco Furlan's lawyers also agreed to this request. Doctors were brought in to examine Wolfgang. Their names were Bologna and Reggiani. They spent time with Wolfgang and studied him. They came to a conclusion. They said that Wolfgang Abel had a reduced ability to understand the consequences of his actions. They also said that he had grown up without enough emotional attention from his family, which they believed affected his personality development. This report was meant to argue that he was not fully responsible for his crimes. However, this conclusion was strongly disputed by other experts and by the prosecution. They argued that Wolfgang was intelligent and knew exactly what he was doing. The trial continued. The public prosecutor spoke to the court. He asked for the harshest possible punishment. He asked for both men to be sentenced to life in prison. Life in prison in Italy means spending the rest of your life behind bars. The judges listened to all the arguments. They reviewed all the evidence. On February 10th, 1987, they reached a verdict. Wolfgang Abel and Marco Ferlin were found guilty of multiple murders. However, the judges did not give them life in prison. They sentenced both men to 30 years in prison. This was a long sentence, but less than what the prosecutor had asked for. The case did not end there. Both men appealed the decision. An appeal means asking a higher court to review the case. On June 15, 1988, the Court of Assizes of Venice, which is a higher court, made a decision. They ordered that Marco Ferlin be sent to a specific prison. It was in a town called Casale di Scodosia, in the province of Padua. He was supposed to stay there while waiting for the final decision from the highest court, the Court of Cassation. But Marco Ferlin did not wait. In February 1991, he escaped from the prison in Casale di Scodosia. He ran away. He disappeared. The police searched for him, but could not find him. He had vanished. This happened just before the final sentence was going to be announced by the Court of Cassation. On February 11, 1991, the Court of Cassation confirmed the sentences. They reduced the sentence slightly for both men. Wolfgang Abel was now sentenced to 27 years in prison. Marco Ferlin was also sentenced to 27 years in prison. But Marco was not there to hear the sentence. He was a fugitive. For 4 years, Marco Ferlin lived as a wanted man. He had fled Italy. He went to the island of Crete, which is part of Greece. He lived there under a false name. He tried to build a new life and avoid being caught. But the Italian police did not stop looking for him. They worked with Greek authorities. In May 1995, they finally found him. He was arrested in Crete and brought back to Italy. After his arrest, Marco was put in prison. He was deeply upset about being caught. He tried to kill himself in his cell. He took a sheet and tried to hang himself from the bars of his cell. But prison guards found him in time and stopped him. He was not hurt. Back in prison, both men served their time. Over the years, they applied for early release or changes to their sentence. The court considered their behavior in prison. They had been well behaved for many years. On April 18, 2008, news came out about Marco Ferlin. The Milan Surveillance Court made a decision. They decided to assign Marco Ferlin to social services. This meant he could leave prison during the day for work or other activities, but had to return at night and on weekends. His lawyer had asked for full release, but the court chose this option instead. They noted his good conduct and that his full release was scheduled for early 2009 anyway. While out on this program, on April 24, 2008, Marco Ferlin earned a second university degree. He graduated with honors in computer engineering. On November 12, 2010, he was released on probation. This meant he was free, but had to follow certain rules. Later, he was fully released. Wolfgang Abel also went through a similar process. In 2009, he was moved from prison to house arrest. He served his house arrest at his family home in Valpolicella, the town where he grew up. After his sentence was finished, he had a period of probation. He also had to report regularly to the police in Nigra, his hometown. Finally, on November 24, 2016, the surveillance magistrate revoked the last of these rules. Wolfgang Abel was given complete freedom. After his release, he gave an interview to a newspaper called the Corriere del Veneto. In the interview, he said he was ready to make new statements and share more about his criminal experiences. Both men stated that they no longer had any contact with each other. They had gone their separate ways. Years later, on October 28, 2024, newspapers announced that Wolfgang Abel had died. He died on October 25, 2024, at the Ospedale Sacro Cuor don Calabria in Nigra di Valpolicella. He was 65 years old. The cause of his death was related to an injury from years before. In 2021, he had fallen at his home and never fully recovered from his injuries. His death marked the end of his part in the story. There is one more part to the story that happened while they were in prison. The name Ludwig had become known through newspaper reports. Other people, who were not connected to Wolfgang or Marco, became interested in their ideas. These were younger people who also held extreme beliefs. On February 27, 1990, a group of these people organized attacks in Florence. They beat up street vendors and immigrant drug dealers. They left flyers signed with the name Ludwig. Later, they carried out bomb attacks against camps where Roma people lived. These attacks injured many people. One bomb attack was especially terrible. It happened at an immigrant camp in the province of Pisa. A young girl lost an eye and a hand in the explosion. These copycats were eventually caught by the Italian police and Carabinieri. When questioned, they said they had never met Wolfgang Abel or Marco Furlan. They had only read about them in the news and wanted to copy what they did. The case of Wolfgang Abel and Marco Furlan, known as the Ludwig case, was finally closed with the death of Wolfgang Abel, leaving behind the memory of the 27 people who lost their lives and the 39 who were wounded during their 7 years of crimes. Story 3. The man who would later be called the Monster of Florence was not one person, but several. However, the person whose name became most connected to the crimes was Pietro Pacciani. To understand what happened, you must first understand where he came from and how he lived. Pietro Pacciani was born on January 7, 1925, in a small village called Castelletti, near the town of Montespertoli in the hills outside Florence, Italy. He was born into a family of poor farmers. His parents worked the land, as most people in that area did at the time. Life was hard. There was never much money, and children were expected to work from a young age. Pietro did not receive much formal education. He learned to read and write only a little. His real school was the fields, where he learned to farm and tend animals. As a young man, Pacciani worked as a peasant farmer or contadino. He was known in his small community as someone who kept to himself, but also had a quick temper. People who knew him then said he could be friendly one moment and angry the next. He was not a person people felt comfortable around for long periods. In 1951, when Pacciani was 26 years old, he committed his first known killing. The victim was a man named Antonio Lopresti. Lopresti had been in a relationship with a woman who had previously been Pacciani's girlfriend. Pacciani did not accept this. One night, he confronted Lopresti. An argument started. Pacciani pulled out a shotgun and shot Lopresti dead. The killing was not planned in a careful way. It was an act of sudden, explosive anger. After this murder, Pacciani was arrested. He was put on trial and found guilty. The court sentenced him to 30 years in prison. However, he did not serve the full sentence. In Italy at that time, there were laws that could reduce a prisoner's time for good behavior and other reasons. Pacciani was released in 1964, after serving about 13 years behind bars. When he got out of prison, Pacciani returned to the countryside where he grew up. He went back to working as a farmer. He found work on various properties. He also got married. He and his wife had 2 daughters. To people who did not know him well, he seemed like an ordinary, hard-working man. He went to work, he came home, and he stayed out of trouble. But inside his home, things were not normal. Pacciani was a violent and controlling man with his family. His wife and daughters lived in fear of him. He would beat them. He treated them more like property than like family members. This behavior was not something the wider community saw, but it was a constant part of his family's life. His daughters, in particular, suffered greatly at his hands. Years later, they would testify in court about the abuse they endured. Because of his violent behavior at home, Pacciani eventually faced legal trouble again. He was charged with the rape of his 2 daughters. In 1974, he was convicted for these terrible acts. The court sentenced him to another prison term. However, the legal process and the sentencing took time. He was not sent away immediately. The timing of this second conviction is important because it placed him under a legal cloud right at the moment when a new series of killings began in the hills around Florence. Pacciani had specific habits. He was known to carry a knife with him, which was not unusual for a farmer. He also owned guns. He used them for hunting and for killing animals on the farm. He was comfortable with weapons. He was also a man who spent a lot of time outdoors in the countryside, often at night. He knew the back roads, the hidden lanes, and the wooded areas very well. This knowledge came from his work and his life as a farmer. In his village, people thought of him as a strange character. Some called him Lo Zingaro, which means the gypsy, because he was always wandering around. He was not a trusted person, but he was also not seen as a monster. He was just the rough, poor farmer who lived nearby. He had a few friends, other men who were also on the edges of society. One of these men was Mario Vanni, another local farmer. Vanni was smaller and seemed to follow Pacciani's lead. They would meet at local bars and eat snacks together, which is why they later became known as the Snack Buddies. So, as the 1970s began, Pietro Pacciani was a man with a past full of violence. He had killed once in a fit of rage. He had abused his own children. He had spent many years in prison. He was back in the countryside, working the land, but carrying with him a deep capacity for cruelty. He knew the isolated places where lovers went to be alone. He knew how to use a gun and a knife. And he was about to intersect with a series of events that would make his name famous for all the wrong reasons. In the summer of 1974, the hills outside Florence were quiet places. Young couples looking for privacy would drive their cars down dark, unpaved roads into the woods. They went there to be alone, away from the eyes of their parents and the small towns where everyone knew everyone. They did not know that someone was watching them. On the night of September 14th, 1974, a young couple drove to a country lane near Borgo San Lorenzo. The boy was Pasquale Gentilcore, 19 years old. He worked as a barman. The girl was Stefania Pettini, just 18. She was training to be an accountant. They parked Pasquale's small Fiat 127 in a secluded spot. They believed they were safe and alone. A short time later, another car approached. It stopped nearby. A man got out. He was carrying a pistol. He walked quietly up to the Fiat. The couple inside did not hear him coming. The man raised the gun and fired through the window. The first bullet hit Pasquale. He died instantly or very quickly. The gun was a .22 caliber Beretta. It was not a powerful weapon, but at close range it was deadly. The sound of the shots would have been loud in the quiet night. The killer then opened the car door. Stefania was still alive. She was terrified. She tried to run. She got out of the car and ran into the woods, screaming. The killer chased her. He caught her. He shot her multiple times. But he did not stop there. He had a knife. He stabbed Stefania 97 times. It was an act of extreme, furious violence. After she was dead, the killer did something strange and horrifying. He took a stalk from a grapevine and pushed it inside her body. Then he left her there in the woods and drove away. The next morning, the bodies were found. The police were confused. They had never seen anything like this. It seemed like a crime of passion, but who could be so angry? They looked for suspects. They questioned people, but they found no clear answer. The case went unsolved. 7 years passed. Then on June 6, 1981, it happened again. This time, the place was near Scandicci, another town outside Florence. The victims were Giovanni Foggi, 30, and Carmela DiNuccio, 21. They were engaged to be married. They were parked in Giovanni's car in a quiet area. The killer approached. He shot Giovanni first. Then he turned to Carmela. He pulled her body out of the car. He used his knife to cut out a part of her body, the pubic area. He took this piece of flesh with him. Then he left. This time, something strange happened even before the bodies were found. The next morning, a young man named Enzo Spalletti started talking to people about the murder. He was a paramedic. He spoke about details that had not been made public. The police arrested him. He spent 3 months in jail, accused of the killing. But then the real killer struck again, and Enzo was released. This showed that the killer was still out there, and he was not finished. The third murder came quickly, just a few months later. On October 23, 1981, another couple was attacked. This time it was in Calanzano. The victims were Stefano Baldi, 26, and Susanna Cambi, 24. They were also engaged. They were parked in a park area. The killer shot Stefano first. Then he took Susanna from the car and cut out her pubic area, just as he had done with Carmela. Before this murder, Susanna had told her mother that someone was bothering her, following her car. She was afraid, but she did not know who it was. The police now knew they had a serial killer. They called him the Monster of Florence. They connected the 1981 murders to the one in 1974. Ballistic tests proved the same gun had been used. They had a pattern: couples in parked cars, shot with a .22 pistol, and the female victims mutilated with a knife. The next attack happened on June 19, 1982. The victims were Paolo Mainardi, 22, and Antonella Migliorini, 20. They were parked on a road in Montespertoli. The killer shot them both. But this time, something went wrong for him. The car's interior light came on. A passing motorist saw the light and the car. The killer panicked. He did not have time to mutilate Antonella. He tried to move the car, maybe to hide it. He drove it a short distance but lost control. The car ended up in a ditch. Paolo was still alive when he was found, but he died later in the hospital from his wounds. The police now had more clues. After this murder, the police made a smart move. They leaked false information to the press. They said that Paolo had woken up in the hospital and spoken before he died. This was a lie, but the killer did not know that. Soon after, the police received an anonymous letter. The writer told them to look again at a very old murder from 1968. That murder had been solved, or so they thought. In 1968, a man named Antonio Lobianco and a woman named Barbara Lacci had been shot dead in their car near Signa. Barbara's 6-year-old son was in the back seat and survived. Barbara's husband, Stefano Mele, had been convicted of that crime. The police went back to the evidence files from 1968. What they found was shocking. Inside the file there were bullets and shell casings. These were not supposed to be there. When they tested them, they discovered that these bullets and casings had been fired from the same gun used in the recent monster murders. This meant the 1968 murder was connected. But Stefano Mele, the man convicted for it, had been in prison when the 1974 and 1981 murders happened. He could not be the monster. Someone else had that gun. The police now knew the killer had been active for much longer than they thought. Despite this new information, the murders continued. On September 9, 1983, the killer struck again. This time, the victims were not Italian. They were 2 young men from West Germany, Wilhelm Meyer and Jens Rusch, both 24. They were students traveling in Italy. They were sleeping in their Volkswagen van in a wooded area near Galuzzo. The killer shot them both. Because they had long hair, the police thought one might have been mistaken for a woman. The killer mutilated one of the bodies, but the evidence was confusing. On July 29, 1984, another couple was killed. The place was near Vicchio. The victims were Claudio Stefanaxi, 21, a law student, and Pia Rontini, 18, a barmaid. They were parked in Claudio's Fiat Panda. The killer shot Claudio first. Then he took Pia from the car. This time, his mutilations were worse. He cut out her pubic area, and he also cut off her left breast. He took both pieces with him. Before this murder, Pia had told a friend that an unpleasant man had been bothering her at work. The final double murder happened on the night of September 7th or 8th, 1985. The victims were French tourists. The man was Jean-Michel Crevequevillai, 25, a musician. The woman was Nadine Mariette, 36, a shopkeeper. They were camping in a small tent in a wooded area near San Casciano. The killer found them while they slept. He shot Jean-Michel first, who managed to stumble out of the tent before dying. Then he attacked Nadine inside the tent. He mutilated her body in the worst way yet, cutting out her pubic area and her left breast. After this murder, the killer did something new. A few days later, a letter arrived at the office of the Florence prosecutor, Silvia Della Monica. Inside the envelope was a piece of flesh. It was a part of Nadine Moriet's breast. The killer had cut it off, kept it, and then mailed it to the police as a taunt. The letter was made from letters cut out of a magazine. The message challenged the authorities to find the bodies. At that moment, the bodies had not yet been discovered. A mushroom picker found them later that same day. During these years, the police worked very hard. They followed many leads. One major lead was called the Sardinian Trail. They focused on the family and friends of Barbara Lacci, the 1968 victim. They arrested several men from Sardinia. They held them in prison for months. But while these men were locked up, the 1984 murder happened. So the police had to let them go. They were not the killers. Another suspect was a man named Pietro Pacciani. He was a local farmer with a criminal record. A police officer named Ruggero Perugini began to look at him closely. Pacciani had been convicted of murder in 1951 and of raping his daughters in 1974. He lived in the countryside. He knew the areas where the murders happened. He carried a knife and owned guns. The police searched his house and his land. They looked for evidence. They found a reproduction of a famous painting in his house. They also found, after a very long search, a single bullet in his garden. It was an unfired .22 caliber bullet of the same brand the monster used. This seemed like a clue, but it was not strong proof that he was the killer. While the police focused on Pacciani, the real killer stopped. After the 1985 murder, there were no more attacks. The monster of Florence had vanished. But for the police, the investigation was just moving into a new phase. They had a prime suspect. They had a collection of circumstantial evidence. The next step would be to build a case and try to prove who the monster really was. The story of how the monster of Florence was brought to justice did not end with the last murder in 1985. It took many more years of investigation, false leads, and court trials. The process was long and complicated, and it led to convictions, but also to many questions that remain unanswered to this day. After the 1985 murder of the two French tourists, the killer stopped. There were no more attacks, but the police did not stop working. They continued to follow every clue. The main suspect who emerged from their work was Pietro Pacciani, the farmer with the violent past. The police spent years building a case against him. They collected witness statements. They looked at his history. They noted that he lived in the areas where the murders happened. They pointed out that he knew how to use a gun and a knife. They had the single bullet found in his garden, though its connection to the crimes was weak. In 1993, the police arrested Pietro Pacciani. He was charged with 7 of the 8 double murders. The 1968 murder was not included in his charges because another man had already been convicted for that crime. The trial began in 1994. It was held in a special courtroom in Florence, built like a cage to protect the judges and jury. The whole country watched. Newspapers wrote about it every day. The prosecution's case against Pacciani was mostly circumstantial. They had no direct evidence. They did not have the murder weapon. They did not have DNA linking him to the crime scenes. They did not have the body parts the killer had taken. What they had was his violent history and his presence in the area. They also had testimony from people who said he acted strangely. But the most important evidence came from two men who would later become central to the case: Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti. Mario Vanni was a friend of Pacciani's. He was a small, quiet man who lived in the same area. Giancarlo Lotti was another local man with a troubled life. During the investigation, both men were questioned. At first, they said nothing, but over time, their stories began to change. During Pacciani's trial, Vanni was called as a witness. He was asked about his relationship with Pacciani. His answer became famous. He said they were just compagni di merende, which means snack buddies. He meant they were just friends who met at local bars to eat and drink together. He did not confess to anything, but this phrase stuck, and the group became known as the Snack Buddies in the press. Despite the weak evidence, the jury in the first trial found Pacciani guilty. In November 1994, he was sentenced to life in prison. He was given multiple life sentences, one for each double murder. The court also ordered that he spend long periods in solitary confinement. It seemed like the case was closed, but Pacciani's lawyers appealed the decision. They argued that there was no real proof. They said the police had built a case on guesses, not facts. The appeal trial was held in 1996. This time, the result was very different. The appeal court looked at the evidence again. They saw the same weaknesses. The bullet in the garden was suspicious. The police had searched for it for a very long time, and some people believed it might have been planted. There was no other physical proof. The witnesses were not reliable. The appeal judges decided that Pacciani could not be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They overturned his conviction and set him free. Pacciani walked out of the courtroom a free man. He returned to his village. But his freedom did not last long. The prosecution was not ready to give up. They took the case to Italy's highest court, the Supreme Court of Cassation. In December 1996, this court made a decision. They agreed with the prosecution that the appeal trial had made mistakes. They annulled the acquittal and ordered a new appeal trial for Pacciani. He would have to face court again. But Pacciani never stood trial again. On February 22, 1998, he was found dead near his home. He had suffered a heart attack. Some people suspected he was murdered to keep him quiet, but the official cause of death was natural causes. With his death, the case against him was closed forever. He was never legally proven to be the monster. However, the investigation did not stop. The police had been building a case against Pacciani's friends, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti. While Pacciani was still alive, Lotti had begun to talk. He gave long statements to the police. He confessed that he had been involved in some of the murders. He said he was not the main killer, but he had been present. He named Pacciani as the shooter. He also named Vanni as another accomplice. Lotti's testimony was the key to the next trial. He described the murders in detail. He said the group would drive around at night, looking for couples in parked cars. He said Pacciani would do the shooting and the cutting. He said Vanni would sometimes help. He said his own job was to watch and make sure no one came. His stories were graphic and specific. He knew things that only someone involved would know. But Lotti was not a reliable witness. He changed his story many times. At first, he said the murders were acts of anger because the victims had rejected sexual advances. Later, he gave a different reason. He said Pacciani took the body parts to use in strange rituals. He even mentioned a mysterious doctor who hired them to commit the murders. Despite these inconsistencies, the prosecution used his testimony to build a new case. In 1998, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti went on trial. A third man, Giovanni Faggi, was also charged but was later acquitted. The trial was based almost entirely on what Lottie said. There was still no physical evidence. No gun, no DNA, no body parts. But the jury believed Lottie's confession and his accusations against the others. Vanni was found guilty of 5 of the double murders. He was sentenced to life in prison. Lottie was found guilty of 4 of the murders. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Because he had confessed and helped the prosecution, his sentence was later reduced to 26 years on appeal. The convictions were finally confirmed by the Supreme Court of Cassation in the year 2000. This was the final legal judgment. In the eyes of Italian law, the monster of Florence had been caught. He was not one man, but a group, Pacciani, Vanni, and Lottie. But the story does not end there. Many people, including journalists, investigators, and family members of the victims, did not believe the case was truly solved. They pointed out the many problems. The convictions were based on the word of a single, unreliable witness, Giancarlo Lottie. There was no physical proof. The gun was never found. The motive was never clearly established. Lottie's changing stories suggested he might have been making things up to get a lighter sentence for himself. After the 2000 convictions, new investigations continued. One theory, pushed by a police investigator named Michel Gittari, was that the murders were the work of a satanic cult. He claimed that Pacciani and the others were hired by wealthy and powerful people who wanted body parts for black magic rituals. He pointed to Pacciani's interest in books about the occult. He also investigated a doctor named Francesco Narducci, who had died in 1985. Narducci's body was exhumed and examined, but nothing was ever proven. These theories were exciting for the press, but they led to no new convictions. Gittari's investigations were later criticized, and his special police unit was disbanded. Another theory that emerged much later, in the 2010s and 2020s, involved an American man named Joseph Bevilacqua. He had worked at the American Military Cemetery near Florence during the years of the murders. A journalist named Francesco Amicone spent years investigating Bevilacqua. He claimed Bevilacqua might have been the real monster, and might also have been the infamous Zodiac killer who operated in California in the late 1960s. Amicone based his theory on Bevilacqua's background, his presence in Italy, and some strange things he said. Bevilacqua denied everything. He sued the journalist for defamation. In 2024, an Italian court found the journalist guilty of defamation, saying his theory was bizarre and not supported by evidence. Bevilacqua died in 2022, and no charges were ever filed against him. What is the final truth? The case of the monster of Florence is officially closed in the sense that the convicted men, Vanni and Lottie, served their sentences. Vanni died in prison in 2009. Lottie was released and later died. But the case is not truly solved. The doubts remain. The victims' families never got complete closure. They do not know for sure who killed their loved ones or why. The people of Florence still remember the fear that gripped their city for over a decade. The name Monster of Florence still brings to mind images of dark country roads, young couples in parked cars, and a killer who vanished into the night, leaving behind a mystery that may never be fully understood. In the end, despite the trials and the convictions, the full truth about the monster of Florence died with Pietro Pacciani, Mario Vanni, and anyone else who might have known the real story. Story 4. Donato Bilancia was born on the 10th of July in the year 1951. He was born in the city of Potenza, which is located in a region of southern Italy called Basilicata. His family was not rich. They were ordinary people living in a poor part of the country. When Donato was about 5 years old, his parents decided to move the family north. They were looking for better work and a better life. They first moved to a region called Piedmont in the northwest of Italy. They did not stay there long. Soon after, they moved again, this time to the city of Genoa. Genoa is a large and busy port city in the region of Liguria, right on the coast. This is where Donato grew up. His childhood was not a happy one. He had a problem that caused him great shame. For many years, he wet his bed at night. This is a problem called bedwetting. For most children, it stops as they get older. But for Donato, it continued until he was 10 or even 12 years old. This was very unusual. His mother did not help him with this problem in a kind way. Instead, she used it to punish and shame him. When he wet the bed, she would take the wet sheet and mattress and put them outside on the balcony. She placed them where all the neighbors could see them. This was meant to embarrass him in front of everyone who lived nearby. There were other times when his family shamed him. His aunt, for example, would sometimes get him ready for bed. When she did this, she would pull down his underwear in front of his cousins. She did this to show them that his body was not developing like other boys his age. These experiences made him feel very bad about himself. He felt different from others, and he felt ashamed. Because he was unhappy, he decided to make a change when he was 14 years old. He decided he no longer wanted to be called Donato. He told people to call him Walter instead. He wanted to leave his old identity behind and become someone new. School was also difficult for him. He did not like it, and he was not a good student. He eventually dropped out of high school before he finished. He needed to work, so he took many different jobs. He worked as a mechanic fixing cars. He worked as a bartender serving drinks. He worked in a bakery making bread. He also worked as a delivery boy, taking things to people's homes. He moved from one job to another and never found a career he liked. When he was still a teenager, still under the legal age of 18, he got into trouble with the law for the first time. He stole a motor scooter. He was caught by the police, arrested, and then released. This first crime did not teach him a lesson. He stole again, this time stealing a whole truck that was filled with Christmas sweets and gifts. He was caught and arrested for that too. As he got older, his behavior did not improve. In 1974, when he was 23 years old, he was stopped by the police. They found that he was carrying a gun that he was not allowed to have. He was arrested and sent to jail for this crime. Around this time, people began to worry about his mental health. He was taken to the psychiatric division of the main hospital in Genoa. A psychiatric hospital is a place for people with mental problems. He was put there so doctors could try to help him. But he did not want to stay. He escaped from the hospital. When the police found him and caught him again, he was in even more trouble. Because he had escaped, he was sent to prison for 18 months for an earlier robbery. Over the next many years, Donato Bilancia spent a lot of time in prison. He was sent to prison in Italy and also in France. The crimes were always the same: robbery and armed robbery. He would steal things, often using a weapon or the threat of violence to do it. This pattern of stealing and going to prison continued for a long time. Even though he had a history of mental health problems and had spent many years in prison for robbery, there was something important to notice. Up until he was 47 years old, he had never been violent towards another person. He had stolen things, but he had never hurt or killed anyone. He was a thief, but not a murderer. By the time he reached his late 40s, his life had settled into a routine, but it was not a healthy one. He lived alone. He did not have a wife or children. He had one main problem that took over his life: gambling. He loved to gamble. He would spend his money on card games and other games of chance. He was a compulsive gambler, which means he could not stop himself, even when he lost a lot of money. This habit would soon lead him to a moment that changed everything. The moment that changed everything began with a friend. This friend was a man named Maurizio. Maurizio knew about Donato Bilancia's biggest weakness: his addiction to gambling. Maurizio had a plan to use this weakness to cheat Donato out of money. He invited Donato to a private card game. Donato agreed to go, thinking it was just a normal game among friends. When Donato arrived at the apartment where the game was being held, he did not know that the game was fixed. The other players were working with Maurizio. They used tricks and signals to make sure Donato could not win. Hand after hand, he lost money. But he kept playing, unable to stop himself. Gambling addiction made him believe he could win his money back if he just kept playing. By the time the night was over, Donato had lost an enormous amount of money. He lost £185,000. In American money at that time, this was about $227,000. It was a huge sum, almost all the money he had. He felt shocked and sick. But soon, the shock turned into something else. It turned into a cold, burning anger. He realized he had been betrayed. His own friend had set him up to steal his money. This anger grew inside him for weeks. He thought about it all the time. He could not let it go. He decided that Maurizio had to be punished. He decided that Maurizio had to die. In October of 1997, Donato went to meet Maurizio. They were in an apartment in Genoa. An argument started. Donato attacked Maurizio. He used his hands to strangle him. He squeezed his throat until Maurizio could not breathe anymore and died right there in the apartment. Donato then left the body there. He did not try to hide it. He just walked away. For a while, it seemed like nothing would happen. Maurizio was found dead, but the police did not suspect murder. Maurizio had health problems, so the authorities looked at the body and decided he had died from a heart attack. Donato had gotten away with his first killing, but he was not finished. His anger was still there. He knew that Maurizio was not the only one responsible for the cheating. There was another man, the man who had run the card game. His name was Giorgio. Donato decided that Giorgio also had to pay. This time, he planned it more carefully. He got a gun. It was a .38 caliber revolver, a type of handgun. He bought special bullets for it called wad cutters. These bullets are flat on the front. They are very deadly because they cut a clean hole when they hit a person. In the same month, October, Donato went to Giorgio's home. Giorgio was there with his wife. Donato shot Giorgio dead. Then, he turned and shot Giorgio's wife dead too. After they were both on the floor, Donato went through their home. He found their safe and forced it open. He took all the money and jewelry inside. He had started as a robber, and now he was a robber who killed. After killing Giorgio and his wife, something changed inside Donato. He later said that these first killings gave him a taste for murder. The anger and the fear he felt were replaced by a strange feeling of power. He began to think about killing again. Later that same month, he saw a jeweler leaving his shop. Donato followed the man home. He wanted to rob him. When the jeweler got to his apartment, Donato forced his way in. He pulled out his gun. But the jeweler's wife saw what was happening, and she started to scream, very loudly. Donato panicked. He shot the jeweler. Then he shot the wife to stop her screaming. They both died. After they were dead, he found their safe and emptied it of all the jewelry. His next victim was a man who worked as a money changer. This was a person who exchanged one type of money for another, so he often had a lot of cash. Donato went to his office, robbed him, and shot him dead. Then, for a period of about 2 months, Donato stopped killing. But in early 1998, he started again. One night, he saw a security guard walking his route, checking on buildings. Donato did not know this man. He had no reason to hurt him, but he later explained that he simply did not like night watchmen. He shot the guard and killed him, just because of a feeling he had. His killings became more random. He started to target women who worked as sex workers. He would go to areas where they waited for clients. He killed an Albanian woman. He killed a woman from Russia. He did not rob them all the time. Sometimes he just killed them. In March, he killed another money changer. This time, he shot the man many times. Then he found the safe and stole the money inside. This showed that he still had his old habit of robbery, but now murder was always part of it. Later in March, he went to see a sex worker. He wanted her to perform a sex act on him. To control her, he held his gun to her head. While this was happening, 2 night watchmen walked by and saw them. They interrupted. Donato became angry. He shot both watchmen, killing them. Then he turned the gun on the woman and shot her too. He left her for dead and ran away. But she did not die. She was badly hurt, but she survived. Later, she would be able to describe him to the police. He kept killing. He killed a sex worker from Nigeria. He killed another from Ukraine. He also attacked an Italian sex worker. He robbed her and hurt her badly, but for some reason he did not kill her. She also survived. By April of 1998, he was killing often. He had a new idea. He wanted to kill a woman he did not know, a normal woman, just for the experience. On April 12th, he bought a ticket and boarded a train going from Genoa to Venice. He walked through the cars until he saw a young woman traveling alone. He decided she would be his victim. He waited until she got up and went to the toilet on the train. He followed her. He had a special key, a skeleton key, that could open most doors. He used it to unlock the toilet door. He pushed it open. The woman was trapped inside the small room. He raised his gun and shot her in the head. She died instantly. Before he left the train, he stole her ticket, so no one would wonder why she had not gotten off. Just 6 days later, on April 18th, he did it again. He boarded a train going to a city called San Remo. He found another young woman traveling by herself. He followed her to the toilet, used his skeleton key to open the door, and pushed his way in. This time, he did something different. He used the woman's own jacket to wrap around the gun. This muffled the sound of the shot. He shot her behind the ear, and she died. The sight of her black underwear excited him. He touched himself and used her clothes to clean up the small room before he left. These 2 murders of young, respectable women caused a lot of fear and anger among the public. The newspapers wrote about them. The police created a special team just to find the killer. Donato killed one more person after that. On April 20th, he stopped at a gas station to fill up his car. A young man named Giuseppe Melito worked there as an attendant. After putting the gas in the car, Donato realized he did not have enough money to pay. He decided to rob the station. He pulled out his gun. As he was taking the money, another car pulled into the station. Donato got nervous. He saw the attendant, Giuseppe, look at the other driver. Donato was afraid Giuseppe would ask the driver for help. So he shot Giuseppe. He killed him right there, took the money from the cash register, about $1,000, and drove away as fast as he could. Donato Bilancia had now killed 17 people. He had killed his friend, his enemy, a jeweler and his wife, money changers, security guards, sex workers, and innocent women on trains. He had killed for revenge, for money, and for the strange thrill it gave him. There was no pattern that the police could see. The victims were all different. The places were all over northern Italy. He seemed to be a ghost, appearing and disappearing without a trace. But small pieces of information were starting to appear. A woman had survived and given a description. A car had been seen. These small pieces were like threads, and the police were beginning to pull on them. While Donato Bilancia was committing his murders, the police in different cities were finding bodies. They did not know at first that all these deaths were connected. A dead man in an apartment, a dead jeweler and his wife, dead sex workers in different places, a dead gas station attendant. They seemed like separate cases. But after the 2 women were killed on trains in April, everything changed. The public was scared. The newspapers were demanding answers. The police were under great pressure to find the killer. A special team of police officers was formed. Their only job was to catch the person responsible for these murders. They began to look at all the cases again, searching for anything that connected them. They found one small clue. One of the sex workers who had been killed was last seen getting into a dark-colored car. It was described as a Mercedes. Another witness, who had seen a woman get into a car on the night she died, also described a dark Mercedes. This was a very small detail, but it was a start. Then, they had a much bigger piece of information. They had the woman who survived. The sex worker who had been shot in March after the two night watchmen were killed was still alive. She had been in the hospital, recovering from her wound. When she was well enough, the police talked to her. She told them everything she remembered. She described the man who had attacked her. She described his face, his hair, his age. She worked with a police artist. The artist drew a picture of the man based on her description. This sketch was the first real image the police had of the killer. The police took this sketch and started showing it to people. They showed it to other sex workers. They showed it to people who worked in the areas where the murders happened. One person looked at the sketch and said the face looked familiar. They did not know his name, but they knew where he lived. He lived in an area of Genoa called San Frutuoso. This was a big breakthrough. The police now had a neighborhood. They could focus their search. They also had the description of the dark Mercedes. They started looking for a man in the San Frutuoso area who matched the sketch and who owned a dark Mercedes. It did not take them long to find Donato Bilancia. He lived alone in an apartment in that neighborhood. He owned a black Mercedes. He was 47 years old, which matched the description. He also had a long criminal record for robbery. To the police, he became their #1 suspect. The police did not arrest him immediately. They wanted to be sure. They wanted to gather more proof. They started watching him. They followed him everywhere for 10 days. They watched him buy coffee. They watched him smoke cigarettes. They waited for him to throw things away. One day, they saw him throw away a coffee cup and some cigarette butts. After he walked away, the police officers moved in. They carefully picked up the coffee cup and the cigarette butts. These items had his saliva and skin cells on them. They could be used for DNA testing. DNA is the unique chemical code inside every person's cells. It is like a fingerprint, but even more exact. The police already had DNA evidence from some of the crime scenes. They had found skin cells or blood from the killer at several places where women were murdered. They took the coffee cup and the cigarette butts to a laboratory. The scientists there ran tests on them. They compared the DNA from the cup to the DNA from the crime scenes. It was a perfect match. The man who drank from the cup was the same man who had left his DNA at the murders. They had their proof. On the 6th of May, 1998, the police moved in. They went to Donato Bilancia's apartment in Genoa. They knocked on the door, and when he opened it, they arrested him. They searched his home. In a hidden place, they found the gun. It was a .38 caliber revolver. Ballistics experts would later prove that this was the gun used in the murders. They had the suspect, the DNA match, and the weapon. The case was strong. At first, Donato did not say much. He was held in a police cell. For 8 days, he was questioned by the investigators. He said nothing. He just sat there. But on the 8th day, something changed. He asked to speak to the lead investigator. He said he was ready to talk. And then he talked for 2 days straight. He told them everything. He confessed to all 17 murders. He named each victim. He explained how he had killed them. He told them about the card game and the betrayal. He told them about the train murders. He drew 17 different diagrams, showing exactly how each crime happened. He did not seem sorry. He spoke as if he was reporting facts about someone else's life. With his full confession, the case was ready for court. The trial began in a courtroom in Italy. It lasted for 11 months. The main witness against him, besides his own confession, was the woman he had shot and left for dead. She came to the court and pointed at him. She identified him as the man who had attacked her. Donato sat in the courtroom and listened. He showed no emotion. On the 12th of April, in the year 2000, the judge read the verdict. Donato Bilancia was found guilty of 17 murders. He was also found guilty of 1 count of attempted murder for the woman who survived. The judge sentenced him to 13 terms of life in prison. In Italy, a life sentence means what it says. The judge also added an extra 20 years in prison for the attempted murder. The judge made a special order. He said that Donato Bilancia must never be released from prison. He would stay there until the day he died. After the trial, Donato was sent to a prison in the city of Padua called Due Palazzi Prison. In prison, his behavior changed. He became known as a model prisoner. He did not cause trouble. He followed the rules. He decided to go back to school. For 5 years, he studied accounting. In 2016, he passed his exams and got a diploma with a good score. After that, he started studying tourism at a university level through a prison program. In 2017, he tried to use his good behavior to get his sentence reduced. He asked a court to change his life sentence to a normal sentence of 30 years, which would mean he could eventually go free. The highest court in Italy, the Supreme Court of Cassation, looked at his request. They rejected it. He would stay in prison for life. Later that same year, he made another request. He asked for a temporary permit to leave the prison for a few hours. He wanted to visit the graves of his parents in a cemetery in a town called Monferrato. The prison agreed, but he did not go alone. He was taken by armed police officers who watched him the whole time. He was allowed to visit the graves, and then he was taken straight back to prison. In late 2019, he asked for another temporary leave. This time, the court said no. They asked a psychologist to examine him. The psychologist said that Donato was still dangerous. The psychologist explained that Donato had never learned to control his anger. He could not handle frustration. If he was outside prison and something made him angry, he might kill again. The court also noted that Donato had never said he was sorry for his crimes. He never showed regret. He still said that he was possessed by a sickness during the time he killed. He did not take full responsibility for his actions. Because of this, the court decided he was not safe to leave, even for a short time. Donato Bilancia stayed in the Due Palazzi prison. In late 2020, a new danger arrived at the prison that no one could control. A virus called COVID-19 was spreading all over the world. It spread easily in crowded places like prisons. Many prisoners and guards became sick. Donato caught the virus. His body was 69 years old and could not fight it off. On the 17th of December, 2020, Donato Bilancia died in the prison. He died from the complications of COVID-19. He never left prison. He served his sentence until his last breath. The 17 people he killed could not be brought back. Their families lived with the pain of what he had done. But with his death in prison, the story of Donato Bilancia, one of the most murderous criminals in Italy's history, finally came to a complete end. Story 5. Ludwig Tesnau was born on the 15th of February in the year 1872. The place of his birth was a small, quiet village in the northern part of Germany. The name of this village was Neuendorf. It was located near a larger town called Greifswald. His family were simple, working-class people. His father, whose name was also Ludwig, worked as a carpenter. This was a common job for men in small villages at that time. His mother, Dorothea, was responsible for taking care of their home and their many children. Ludwig was not an only child. He grew up with several brothers and sisters in a small, crowded house. The family did not have much money. Life was hard, and everyone had to work and help out from a young age. As a child, young Ludwig would have watched his father work. He would have seen him cutting wood, shaping planks, and building furniture or parts of houses. The smell of sawdust and wood glue would have been familiar to him. He likely did not receive much formal schooling beyond the basic lessons taught to village children. His real education was in his father's workshop. When he was old enough, his father began to teach him the craft of carpentry. Ludwig learned how to use the tools of the trade. He learned to handle saws, hammers, chisels, and planes. He learned how to measure wood carefully and how to join pieces together to make something strong and useful. Carpentry was a physical and messy job. It was normal for a carpenter's clothes to become stained. Wood has natural juices and saps. Wood glue could spill. Most importantly, carpenters often used wood stains and dyes to change the color of the wood they were working on. These stains could be dark brown, red, or black. It was very common for a carpenter to have these dark marks on his hands and his clothing. When Ludwig became a young man, he finished his basic training as a carpenter. He then became a journeyman. This was a common step in a craftsman's life in Germany at that time. A journeyman traveled from town to town, working for different master carpenters. This allowed him to learn new skills and see different places. Ludwig Tesnau became a wanderer. He did not stay in one place for a very long time. He moved around the countryside, looking for work wherever he could find it. This life meant he did not form many deep or lasting friendships. He was often a stranger in a new town. People who met him during these years would later describe him as a quiet man. He kept to himself. He did not talk much about his past or his feelings. He was simply a worker who did his job and then moved on. By the time he was in his mid-20s, Ludwig Tesnau's behavior began to show some small but unusual patterns. He was known to be a very private person. He did not seek out the company of women. He never married. He lived alone in small rented rooms. Other carpenters he worked with noticed that he had a strange habit. He was extremely concerned with keeping his clothes clean, which was odd for a carpenter. While most carpenters accepted stains as part of the job, Tesnau would often wash his work clothes very carefully. He would scrub at them for a long time. If someone commented on a stain on his pants or shirt, he would become defensive. He would immediately give a detailed explanation for how that particular mark got there. He would say it was wood stain from a specific job, or glue from a table he had repaired. He seemed very worried that people might think the stains were something else, although at that time, no one thought anything of it. They just thought he was a bit strange. In the late 1890s, Tesnau was living and working in the area around Osnabrück, a city in northwest Germany. He found work in small villages near the city, like a place called Lechtingen. He continued his quiet, solitary life. He would take small carpentry jobs for local farmers and families. He would fix a broken chair, build a new fence, or repair a wooden gate. He was known as a capable worker, but people found him hard to get to know. He was an outsider. He did not attend local festivals or spend time in the village taverns. He kept his strange habit of washing his clothes and being quick to explain any spots or marks. This was his life. A series of small jobs in small towns, living in the shadows, always on the move and always keeping people at a distance. In January of 1899, he decided to leave the Osnabrück area and move to a village called Babe on the island of Rügen, which is on the Baltic Sea coast. He settled there, continuing to work as a carpenter, still living alone, and still keeping his quiet, private life. This is where his life stood as the new century began. He was a man without a family of his own, without close friends, and with habits that made people think he was simply an odd, solitary carpenter. On the morning of September 9th, 1898, a Friday, life in the small village of Lechtingen, near Osnabrück, was normal. Two little girls who lived next door to each other got ready for school. Their names were Hannelore Heidmann and Else Langmeyer. Both were 7 years old. At around 8 in the morning, they left their homes to walk to the village school. The school was only about 300 yards from their houses. It was a short, familiar walk they had done many times before. They never arrived. When noon came, both girls did not come home for lunch. Their mothers, Jadwiga Heidmann and Irmgard Langmeyer, became worried. They walked to the school to see if their daughters had been kept late. At the school, they received a terrible shock. The teachers told them that neither Hannelore nor Else had been in class that day. The The girls had simply vanished. The two mothers ran to find their husbands. The men left their jobs immediately. A search party was formed with neighbors and friends. They searched every street, every barn, and every garden in the village. They called out the girls' names for hours. As the afternoon passed and the sun began to go down, the searchers spread out further. They began to look in the woodlands that were near the village. The light was fading, and they used lanterns to see. Just after 9 o'clock at night, the searchers made a gruesome discovery in the forest. They found the body of a child. It was Hannelore Heidman. Her body was not just lying there. It had been cut into pieces. Her arms and legs had been severed from her body. The parts were scattered on the ground in different places among the trees. Later that same night, the police who had arrived at the scene found the body of Else Langmeyer. It was hidden under some bushes, not far from where Hannelore had been found. Her body had been mutilated and cut apart in the exact same way. The police immediately began to question everyone in the village. They wanted to know if anyone had seen anything strange that morning. One person came forward with important information. This witness told the police that he had seen a local carpenter walking into the village from the direction of the woods. The carpenter's name was Ludwig Tesnow. The witness said Tesnow's clothes were covered in dark, reddish-brown stains. This was very suspicious. Tesnow was quickly found and arrested. He was still wearing the stained clothing. When the police questioned him, Tesnow was calm. He did not seem nervous or scared. He had a simple answer for everything. He said the stains on his clothes were not blood. He was a carpenter, he explained. He had been working on some jobs for people in the area. He said the stains were wood dye that had splashed onto his clothes. He also said the witness had seen him walking home from one of those jobs, not from the woods where the girls were killed. The police also found that a button was missing from his coat. A single button had been found near the bodies of the girls. The button from the crime scene matched the buttons on Tesnow's coat. But Tesnow said he had lost that button weeks earlier. The police had no proof that he was lying. There were no witnesses who saw him with the girls. The science to test the stains on his clothes did not exist yet. They could not prove the stains were blood. After questioning him, the police had to let him go. They did not have enough evidence to hold him. Tesnow was free. He did not run away. He stayed in Lechtingen for a few more months, and people still saw him wearing those stained clothes. In January of 1899, he packed his things and moved far away. He went to the island of Rügen, to a village called Babe. For a few years, life in his new home was quiet. Then, on the evening of July 1st, 1901, two young brothers left their home in the nearby village of Gorin. Their names were Hermann and Peter Stubb. Hermann was 8 years old. Peter was 6. They told their parents they were going to play near the house. When it was time for supper, the boys did not come back. Their father, a man named Wilhelm Stubb, went out to look for them. He searched the streets near his home. A neighbor helped him. A village policeman also joined the search, but they could not find the boys. The night grew dark, and the search had to stop. The boys were officially reported missing. The next morning, a neighbor was walking through a thick patch of woodland close to the Stubb home. In the thicket, he found the bodies of the two boys. They had been killed in a way that was horrifying and familiar. Both boys had been hit many times with a large stone. The stone was found near their bodies, covered in dark stains. Their bodies had been mutilated, just like the girls in Lechtingen 3 years earlier. Their bodies were cut and torn apart. Parts of them were scattered all over the woods. Peter, the younger one, had his skull crushed. His neck was cut almost all the way through. There was a deep, jagged wound in his stomach, and his intestines were hanging out. His heart had been cut out of his chest and was missing. Hermann's body had been cut in half. His legs and pelvis were completely severed from his upper body. These parts were found in a different place in the woods. His heart was also missing and was never found. The police came and began their investigation. They questioned everyone who lived in Gorin and the nearby villages. One woman came forward. She told the police that she had seen the two Stubb brothers on the afternoon they disappeared. They were talking to a man. She knew the man. He was a carpenter who lived in the next village. His name was Ludwig Tesnow. People in the area thought he was an odd, quiet man who kept to himself. On July 2nd, 1901, the day after the bodies were found, Ludwig Tesnow was arrested again. He was taken to a police station. He protested and said he was innocent. He did not know anything about the dead boys. The police went to his home in Babe to search it. They found several pieces of clothing that were damp. It looked like Tesnow had recently washed them. Even though they were wet and had been scrubbed, the clothes still had dark stains on them. Under a stone sink in his kitchen, the police found a pair of his boots. These boots were also heavily stained, and they had also been washed recently. When the police showed him the clothes and boots and asked him about the stains, Tesnow gave the same answer he had given 3 years earlier. He was a carpenter. The stains were wood dye. They were from his work. This time, the police did not believe him. They kept him in custody. The local prosecutor handling the case was a man named Ernst Hubschmann. While preparing the case, he learned about another strange event that had happened just a few weeks before the boys were killed. A local farmer had seen a young man running away from one of his fields. When the farmer went to check his field, he found a terrible sight. 7 of his sheep had been attacked and killed. They had not just been killed for meat. They had been mutilated. Their legs and insides were cut off and scattered all over the field. The way the sheep were cut apart was very similar to how the Stubb brothers had been cut apart. Prosecutor Hubschmann brought the farmer to the police station. The farmer looked at a line of men. He pointed directly at Ludwig Tesnow. He said Tesnow was the man he had seen running from his field of dead sheep. When the police questioned Tesnow about the sheep, he again said he was innocent. He admitted he had read about the sheep in the newspaper, but he had nothing to do with it. Once again, he said any stains on his things were just wood dye. While Tesnow sat in his cell, protesting his innocence, the prosecutor Ernst Hubschmann continued to build his case. He read through all of Tesnow's statements carefully. He noticed that Tesnow kept saying the same thing over and over. The stains were wood dye. They were from his work as a carpenter. This constant excuse struck Hubschmann as strange. He began to wonder if Tesnow had used this same excuse before. He decided to look into Tesnow's past. Hubschmann contacted police departments in other regions where Tesnow had lived. He sent messages to the area around Osnabrück, where Tesnow had worked years earlier. Soon, a reply came back from the police in Osnabrück. They had a file on a Ludwig Tesnow. In 1898, he had been a suspect in the brutal murders of 2 little girls, Hannelore Heidmann and Else Langmeyer. The file noted that Tesnow had been arrested at that time because his clothes were covered in dark stains. He had told the police then, just as he was telling them now, that the stains were wood dye from his carpentry work. Because there was no way to prove the stains were blood, he had been released. The case had never been solved. This was a major discovery for Prosecutor Hubschmann. He now had a link between Tesnow and 2 separate sets of child murders, 3 years apart. The pattern was the same. The victims were young children. Their bodies were mutilated and cut apart. And in both cases, Tesnow was found with stained clothing that he claimed was wood dye. Hubschmann knew he needed more than just a pattern. He needed scientific proof. At this time, a German biologist named Paul Uhlenhuth was working at the Hygiene Institute at the University of Greifswald. Greifswald was not far from where Tesnow was being held. Uhlenhuth had been doing important research on blood. He had developed a new scientific test. It was called the precipitin test. This test could do something that had never been done before. It could take a dried stain on a piece of cloth and tell you, with certainty, whether it was blood. Even more amazing, the test could tell you if the blood came from a human or from a specific kind of animal like a cow a chicken, or a sheep. Prosecutor Hubschman learned about Olenhuth's work. He had a meeting with the examining magistrate, a man named Johann Klaus Schmidt. They discussed the possibility of using this new science on Tesno's clothing. It was a new idea, and they were not sure if it would be accepted. But they decided it was their best chance to get the truth. They approved the plan. On July 29, 1901, a package was sent to Paul Olenhuth. It contained Tesno's stained clothes, his boots, and the large stone that had been found next to the bodies of the Stubb brothers. A few days later, on August 1st, a second package with more clothing items was sent. Paul Olenhuth went to work in his laboratory. He carefully cut small pieces from each stain on every piece of clothing. He did the same with the stains on the stone. He used his new testing method on each sample. The process took several days. He had to be extremely careful and precise. On August 5, 1901, he finished his analysis. He wrote a detailed report of his findings. This report was sent to the police on August 8th. Olenhuth's report was the turning point in the case. He wrote that some of the stains on Tesno's overalls and clothing were, in fact, would dye. This was true. Tesno was a carpenter, and he did have dye on his clothes from his work. But that was not all. The vast majority of the stains on his clothing were something else. They were blood. Olenhuth's tests showed that most of the blood on Tesno's jacket, his trousers, and his boots was human blood. But there was more. On some parts of his clothing, Olenhuth found blood that came from sheep. This directly connected Tesno to the mutilated sheep found in the farmer's field. Finally, Olenhuth tested the large stone found at the crime scene. The dark stains on the stone were also human blood. This proved that the stone was the weapon used to kill the Stubb brothers. Tesno's simple lie was finally broken. Science had proven that his clothes were covered in the blood of 2 young boys and several sheep. The police now had the evidence they needed. The case would go to trial. The trial of Ludwig Tesno began in the spring of 1902. It was held in the city of Greifswald, in a large courthouse. The courtroom was full of people. Reporters came to write about the case. Local residents came to see the man accused of such terrible crimes. Tesno sat in the dock. He looked calm and showed little emotion. He was charged with 2 counts of murder for killing Hermann and Peter Stubb. He was also charged with a third crime, which was the violent attack on the sheep. Tesno pleaded not guilty to all charges. He continued to say he had not done these things. The trial lasted for 10 days. Many witnesses were called to testify. The farmer who had found his mutilated sheep came to court. He pointed at Tesno and said he was the man he had seen running from his field. Witnesses from Gorin described finding the bodies of the 2 little boys. Their testimony was difficult to hear, and many people in the courtroom were deeply upset. The most important witness in the trial was Paul Olenhuth. He took the stand and explained his work to the judges and the jury. He spoke in clear, simple terms. He explained how his test worked. He explained that he could separate human blood from animal blood. He showed them his report. He told the court that the stains on Tesno's clothes were not just wood dye. They were a mixture of human blood and sheep blood. His testimony was powerful because it was based on science, not just on what people saw or remembered. For the first time in a German court, science was being used to prove that blood stains on a suspect's clothing came from a victim. The defense lawyers tried to fight this new evidence. They brought in their own experts. They argued that Tesno was not responsible for his actions. They called 6 different psychiatrists to the witness stand. Each of these doctors testified that, in their opinion, Ludwig Tesno was insane at the time he committed the murders. They said he had a diseased mind and did not understand what he was doing. The prosecution also brought psychiatric experts. These doctors agreed that Tesno had serious mental problems. They said he was a man with deep moral degeneracy. But they argued that this did not mean he was legally insane. They said he knew what he was doing was wrong and chose to do it anyway. After 10 days of testimony, the case went to the judges. They did not deliberate for very long. They looked at the evidence. They considered the testimony of the eyewitnesses. They weighed the opinions of the psychiatrists. But the most convincing evidence was the scientific proof from Paul Olenhuth. The stains on Tesno's clothes were human blood. There was no other explanation for how that blood got there. The judges found Ludwig Tesnow guilty on all charges. He was convicted of the 2 murders of the Stubb brothers. He was also convicted of the violent attack on the sheep. The court then pronounced the sentence. For the murders, Tesnow was sentenced to death. The method of execution would be beheading by guillotine. For the crime of attacking the sheep, he was given an additional sentence of 2 years in prison. The court also ordered that he would lose all his political rights as a citizen, which was a common part of a severe sentence at that time. After the sentence was read, Tesnow showed no emotion. He was led away from the courtroom and taken back to his cell. His lawyers immediately began to work on an appeal. They wanted to challenge the conviction and the death sentence. They took the case to a higher court, the Reichsgericht in Leipzig. This was the highest court in Germany at that time. The appeal was heard on March 14, 1904. The lawyers argued that the trial had not been fair and that Tesnow was too insane to be executed. The High Court judges reviewed the case. They looked at all the evidence again. They decided that the original trial had been fair and correct. The judgment was confirmed. The appeal was denied. The death sentence would stand. In the year 1904, Ludwig Tesnow was executed. The execution took place in the courtyard of the prison in Greifswald. The method used was the guillotine. He was led out of his cell and taken to the courtyard. The guillotine was waiting for him. In a single moment, his life was ended. He was approximately 32 years old. The case of Ludwig Tesnow did not end with his death. The methods used by Paul Olenhuth had proven to be extremely important. For the first time, a criminal had been convicted because science could prove that blood on his clothes came from the victim. This was a historic moment in forensic science. On September 8, 1903, even before Tesnow's execution, the Prussian government officially approved the use of the precipitin test as evidence in courts. It became a standard tool for police and investigators. Later, the same testing methods were adapted to identify other bodily fluids, like saliva and semen. The work that Olenhuth did on Tesnow's dirty clothes changed the way crimes would be investigated forever. The little boys, Hermann and Peter Stubb, were buried in their village. The 2 little girls from Lechtingen, Hannelore Heidmann and Else Langmeyer, were also laid to rest. In the village of Lechtingen, people later placed a small monument to remember them. The quiet, wandering carpenter who always had an explanation for the stains on his clothes became a part of history, not just for his terrible crimes, but for the scientific breakthrough that finally brought him to justice.